Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Marks, and our topic for today is privatizing Social Security. What are the pros and what are the cons? So in a sense, what we're doing is talking about the debate over Social Security privatization. Well, remember what we've talked about so far. Privatization, in a pure sense, involves elimination of the Social Security system. So we mean we're turning funds over to private companies for personal investment. So we're getting government out of the system of handling our retirement through Social Security, and instead we're going to leave it to the private market. That's what we mean by privatization. This means that instead of the Social Security retirement benefits we get, it's going to look more like personal retirement accounts that we have at work. For example, at Longwood puts in a certain amount of money every month into a retirement account for me, and it grows. It has my name on it, and I actually manage it. I have to decide what's in it, how to invest my money, how much risk I want to assume, etc. Well, if we privatize Social Security, that's what retirement accounts will really look like. They'll actually be accounts rather than money that comes to us through this pay-as-you-go system. Now, pure privatization is really hard to implement. If we really want to completely privatize the system, this is going to be difficult. Remember, there's an unfunded liability that extends way into the future. What is that liability? Well, we're talking about benefits to people who have paid into the system, but they're not yet retired. So remember, people like me, I'm planning to work for another, let's say, 20 years. When I retire, there's money that's owed to me. I've been paying taxes into the system for years and years and years. When I retire, you guys are going to owe me money. You're going to be working. You're going to be paying taxes, and some of that money needs to come to me. Of course, people who have retired are also part of this unfunded liability. So, for example, my parents are still alive, at least at the time that I'm recording this, knock on wood, but my parents are retired and they may live for another 15 years. So they're part of that unfunded liability as well because they're owed benefits. If we simply eliminate the taxes and you don't pay Social Security taxes, then benefits can't be paid to those who are owed. So if we're trying to privatize, it's difficult because we owe money to people far, far into the future. So any implementable plan for privatizing Social Security is actually going to have to be more of a hybrid type of plan, meaning we can phase out Social Security as we know it now, but it's going to have to be over a long period of time. So we've talked a little bit in class about how would you actually move towards privatization while not completely killing Social Security now. Let's move on to talk about the arguments supporting privatization. What's the appeal of privatization? Why would some people argue in favor of privatization? Well, the number one reason that somebody might argue in favor of privatization is sustainability. We know that our Social Security system, as it exists now, with the pay-as-you-go system, it's not sustainable. You should be asking the question, will it be there when you turn 67? Now, I think it'll be there when I turn 67. It won't be in necessarily great shape, but what about when you turn 67? Remember, we've already shown the data. Workers per retirees are falling, right? Years ago, there were 16 workers for every retiree, and it's fallen to what will be 2 workers per retiree. So this is problematic. That means to maintain the benefits to retirees, tax rates are going to have to go up. How can we possibly pay all the money that's owed when we only have 2 workers for every retiree? Well, you're just going to have to pay more. Or could be a combination of both, we have to cut benefits. And so we've talked a little bit about the problems with raising tax rates for Social Security. It's already 7.65%. That's not small. And benefit cuts, those are not going to be well received either. So the current system is unsustainable, and we've certainly talked about this and we've looked at data. However, private investment, well, that could potentially be more sustainable because the money would be there. It would be in your name. It would be a private investment account. And so while nothing guarantees you would have a great rate of return, the system doesn't go bankrupt on you. Money goes into an account with your name on it, and it continues to grow just like my private retirement account works. The second thing that we need to point to is higher returns in the private market. We've already illustrated that Social Security has relatively low rates of return. Now, if you're in the older generations, your rate of return's not that bad. But what do we know? If nothing changes, then younger generations are going to fare okay, but not great, right? Your rates of returns are going to be really, really low, but you might be able to get payouts. It's just going to be the real rate of return being maybe 0.5%, 1%, not particularly good. But remember, if there are tax increases on you, and it seems like there would have to be between now and, 20, 30 years from now, or if we decide we have to cut benefits to make the system work, remember, your rate of return is impacted. It's a function of your taxes paid and the benefits you get. So if we raise taxes and we cut your benefits, of course, your rate of return is going to decline even more. So that's going to be particularly problematic. Of course, we've already motivated the idea that younger generations should be particularly concerned about this. And again, I want to keep reminding you, the money that you're going to pay from Social Security taxes in your check, that money is not invested for you. I know you already know it because it's a pay-as-you-go system, right? So right now in our current system, there's no account set up for you. But under privatization, that would change. There would be an account. Your money goes into it, and there's your name on it. Remember, any changes to the program between now and any time in the future are going to impact your rate of return. So as we've said, if your taxes increase, you're going to have to pay more in Social Security tax. Your rate of return goes down, right? And if your benefits decrease between now and when you turn 67, well, you're going to get less. So again, your rate of return decreases. So it seems to me, given the unsustainability of our current system, there's no way we can do it without tax increases and or benefit decreases, meaning you're almost guaranteed to see a decrease in the rate of return, which is already low, right? So it's only going to be worse. We have to think about your money and what it might earn in the financial marketplace. Well, seems like we could probably assume, given that you might have a zero rate of return, you could even theoretically have a negative rate of return, right, on your money for Social Security, that over the long run, your money might earn more in the financial marketplace. Now, maybe not every single year, but over your lifetime, it's highly likely. So let's take a look at money's worth in your real rate of return for the median earner. Now, at the bottom, you see a key here. In orange, maroon, kind of that purple color, is if we keep the current program. So if we keep the current program, we see it kind of goes down, and then we see purple. If we have tax increases, green, and if we cut benefits, blue. Now remember, the horizontal axis is a little different. This is birth year, not actual year. So look at your birth year Everyone found it? Well, under our current program, all right, your rate of return might go up a little bit, but where is it? It's between 0.8 and 1%. 1% return on your investment, real return on your investment, that's not very good. If we raise taxes on you, now we're looking at the green line. If we raise taxes, your rate of return goes down. If we cut your benefits, now we're at the blue line and your rate of return goes down. So the bottom line is, under all three scenarios, whether we do nothing, whether we increase taxes, whether we cut your benefits, your rate of return is not all that good. Now we're looking at it another way. This is for high income workers. And remember, you've watched another lecture that looked at rate of return for Social Security. So if we look at rate of return for high income workers, we see, and again, first column is birth year. So not year that you're alive, but what year were you born? So let's say if you were born in 1997, a single male has a rate of return of 1.92, a single female 2.24, and you see that one couple earners 3.89, they get the highest, and two earner couples somewhat less. Now remember, you've seen another lecture that explains why it works that way. So you're responsible for understanding why single females have higher rates of return than single males and why one earner couples have higher rates of return than two earner couples. But do we agree that none of those rates of return are particularly great, but the one earner couple with 3.89, well, that's a little bit closer to, a market rate, although it's pretty conservative, right? Now we're looking at high income workers. Now they have a career average of 94,000. And what do we see here? All right, now let's stay with the same birth year, 1997. And we see that single males make less than 1%, but single females make a little more. One earner couples make significantly more. Two earner couples, not so great. Again, these are not great rates of return. And again, you need to understand why high income might have a different rate of return than people with middle incomes. If you live for a very, very long time, then Social Security might be a good idea for you. It might really work to your benefit. Your rate of return might be great. For example, my grandfather died at 104. So if he retired at 65, which would have been the retirement age when he retired, he lived to 104. Gosh, he earned Social Security benefits for a really, really long time. Remember, that's going to affect your payout, which affects your rate of return. So his rate of return might have been pretty good. But if you're going to die at a normal age, if you're going to be high income, and if you're young right now, all of those things, as you've already learned, mean you have a lower rate of return. And as we suggested, you could even see a negative rate of return, right? You could actually have like a negative 1% rate of return, for example. That is very realistic. So the bottom line is that the private marketplace will likely have higher rates of return than what we're seeing from Social Security. Now, you've seen some of this data already, I realize, but if we look at the S&P inflation-adjusted returns, and this includes dividends, it depends on what period we're looking at. If we look from 1990 to 2014, so we're looking over a 24-year period, the adjusted returns annualized 6.94%. But they've been a little worse, clearly. If we shorten that time frame, looking at 2000 to 2014, now we're only at 1.91. Okay, not so great. But if we shorten the time period even more and look at 2005 to 2014, now we're at 5.41%. So I'm not suggesting that every year the private marketplace does better. I've had some horrible years. Clearly, there's been years where we've had negative returns in the stock market. But over my lifetime, I'm probably going to do better than 1 to 2%. Here's a numerical illustration to help. Your share of Social Security, remember your tax, is 7.65% of your labor income. Remember, we called that a contribution, but it's really a tax. If you make $100,000 a year, then what we're talking about is $7,650 per year taken out of your checks and given to Social Security. Now remember, your income's going to grow over time as well, but let's assume it doesn't. Let's keep this simple, and let's assume you never get a raise, which is clearly an unrealistic assumption, but it makes the math a little easier, but you'll understand what we're looking at. So let's say you invest this money every single year and you work for 35 years. So instead of paying 7.65% to the government for Social Security taxes, you invest that money. And you invest $7,650 every single year for 35 years. Well, here's your real rates of return. 4%, 5%, 6%. Those aren't unreasonable, right? So I'm just giving you three scenarios. If you invest for 35 years at 4%, which isn't horrible, right? I mean, it's doing better than Social Security, right? After 35 years, you're going to have $563,000, right? So you're going to have more than $500,000. Now, if you get a return that's better than that at 5%, so that would be significantly above what the Social Security expected rate of return is for you, you're going to have $690,000. If you get a 6% rate of return over that 35 years, $852,000. Now, we can argue, are we going to see 4%? Are we going to see 5%? Are we going to see 6%? Maybe it's 3.7%, but even that's better than what you're going to get. So even a very modest rate of return is going to outperform Social Security. Also remember, guys, your contribution continues to earn a return on accumulated investments after 35, since we're not going to draw it all down the first year of retirement. So in case I was a little confusing, what I'm saying is that you don't retire and then say, give me all my money out of my retirement account. You don't do that. You draw down a little bit year one and a little bit year two and a little bit year three on retirement. So what I'm saying is that some of that money stays in the account and continues to grow. So remember that. Second, if you start working at 22 years old, which a lot of you will, you'll likely work for 45 years. So if I had done this for 45 years instead of 35 years, of course, you'd have more. C, remember, there's a partial match required from employers. They pay 7.65% now. What if we made them partially match under the new system? In my analysis, remember, you were the only one paying. You paid 7.65%, but what if, I'm sorry, that should say instead of what if there's a partial match required from employers? Well, then you get even more, right? So remember, my analysis is incredibly simplistic. A, you're going to let some of that money stay in the account and continue to grow. You don't pull it all out the minute you retire. B, you're more likely to work more than 35 years. Some of you will work 45 years. C, what if we have the employer have to partially match this? What if they have to put in 3% or 4%? Well, then you get a lot more. You get the idea. So a third thing that we have to think about is lower taxes. Remember, the combination between the employee and the employer portion of Social Security is 15.3%. But given the higher rate of return that we could get with our private accounts, possibly less could be put towards retirement accounts. So maybe instead of 7.65, maybe you only have to put in 6%. And that means more money in your pocket. It's unclear if this would be a shared contribution towards retirement, right? We don't really have anything we're considering in Congress, so we're just kind of thinking out loud here, but we don't really know. But right now there's 15.3% going to Social Security. Surely we could reduce that for the employee and the employer with the higher rates of return and do as well, if not better. And that frees up money. That's good for everybody. A fourth potential benefit is that there's more autonomy and control with private accounts. What we mean by that is that you're going to be in charge of your money. So when Longwood puts money into my retirement account, they don't decide how to invest it. I have to decide how to invest it. So I get to decide how much risk I want to have. And when I was younger, I probably put my money into more risky investments. And now that I'm getting older, I'm getting a little bit more conservative. And as I get closer and closer to retirement, I'll probably move things into funds that are pretty secure because I don't want to take any risks as I get close to retirement. So what that means is you can allocate your money in the manner that's best for you. You can decide how risky to be or how conservative to be. So your portfolio will reflect your level of risk aversion, and that's a good thing. Although, understand that if we do have a privatized plan, there could be some constraints, right? We might not want to simply say to people, put your money wherever you want. Maybe there's approved funds or approved companies that are allowed to manage your accounts. For example, when I have money invested by Longwood, I can't just use any company I want. I have to use an approved company. And these are ones that have good reputations. Now, once I work with that company, and for example, I work with Merrill Lynch. And so they've got my retirement accounts, or whoever bought them during the financial crisis. Anyway, once I have a person handling my money, I can work with that person and decide how to allocate my money across different kinds of investments. But I had to pick between very reputable companies. Could we still have some constraints like that? Yeah. But guys, even if you have some constraints like that, you still have a lot of autonomy and a lot of control over your own money. Number 5, this could lead to greater business investment. Think about how this could lead to greater business investment. Well, if we lower taxes on businesses, then they're going to have more to invest. And so businesses with more to invest can do all kinds of good things. They can invest in capital. Maybe they do more worker training. Who knows? But when businesses have more money to invest, and they do invest it in capital, in labor, in making, investing in human capital, this can increase productivity. It could create new jobs. So maybe some of the money goes to hire new workers. It could stimulate innovation. So the bottom line is, and again, this is an if businesses aren't paying 7.65% anymore, if they're matching, but it's something more, let's say like 4%, frees up money for businesses and they can use it to increase productivity. And that's good for everybody. 6, there could be an increase in national savings. There could be an increase in national savings. Now remember, Social Security is not saving. We remember this because nothing is actually put away in a financial instrument for you. So I've talked about that you guys owe me money. I'm going to get payoffs of, let's say, $2,500 a month. But none of that money is in a savings account right now under the current Social Security system with my name on it. So it's not technically a form of savings. Also remember that Social Security displaces private savings. In other words, we save less privately because we know we'll get Social Security. Now again, I'm not suggesting that I don't save because I'm going to get Social Security. I save a lot. But maybe I would save even more if Social Security didn't exist. So remember, it might crowd out or displace private savings a little bit. So instead of saving $15,000 a year, maybe I would save $17,000 a year if Social Security didn't exist. So the bottom line is Social Security, because it's not a form of savings and because it displaces private investment, results in a lower savings level for the economy. And remember why we care about that. Why do we care about savings in our economy? Well, remember that investing in financial markets channels financial resources to firms, right? Firms need to get loans. Firms want to invest. So they take money out of the financial market. So investing in treasury bonds and those kinds of things is a source of funds for the government. That's another way that it creates good things in our economy. So whether it's firms going to the financial market to take out loans so that they can improve their technology, or whether it's government investing, those are both things. So the bottom line is when we have savings in our economy, it creates sources of money, and that money can be put to productive use. Simple. So now let's turn our attention to the arguments against privatization. Why not privatize Social Security? What are the arguments against? Well, there are a number of concerns that are raised when discussing privatization. So the first thing that comes up is that for us to privatize Social Security, move away from our current system to some kind of market-based system, is going to be an incredibly difficult transition. Remember, we've talked about this huge liability from the current system that goes way into the future. Would it be unethical to simply end Social Security when many people have paid into it for years? Well, seems like that would be a really bad idea. So imagine how somebody like me would react if government said, you know what, we finally decided we can't sustain Social Security, so it's just going to end. And guys, we're really sorry. We know you've paid into the system for years, but there's not going to be any payout to you. Well, that's not going to go over well, am I right? But as we discussed, there's not enough reserves in the trust fund to make this work. They're going to go away soon. We're going to burn through our reserves. And then at some point when we burn through our reserves, the system creates deficits every year. So if we're going to privatize, both systems have to exist simultaneously for many years. In other words, we have to keep our current system alive for people like me, or especially people older than me, because they're due benefits. And we have to create privatization so people like you, young people, when you get your job, you can maybe find a way to have an option for opting out of our current system. But you can't just completely opt out. Remember, we've talked about that you owe me money. So I've shown you a graphic that looks like this, that says when you guys graduate, if we do have privatized Social Security, here's how it's likely to work. You're going to have to pay money into two pots. You're going to have to fund your private investment account. So this could be something mandatory. Maybe, I'm just making up numbers here, but maybe 4.2% comes out of your check and it goes directly into your private investment account. Now, you don't get a choice. This has to happen. It's mandated. You have to participate in a private account. But then you're also going to have to pay for those retirees. So you see the second arrow going to the yellow circle. Maybe after you pay 4.2% into your private investment account, maybe you have to pay 3.4% towards retirees that are in the Social Security system. So if we do see any kind of movement towards privatization, both systems are going to happen simultaneously. Now, hopefully you understand that if your private investment account rates of return are good enough, and certainly better than the zero or negative return you could get in the future from Social Security, that it might make sense for you to only get 4.2% into your private investment account, but still have to pay towards retirees. Again, you still could be better off. Number two, there might be some inherent unfairness relative to Social Security. There could be some inherent unfairness. So, for example, what if you're low income? Do you agree that if you're low income, privately funding a retirement account could be really difficult, right? So let's say 4.2% is mandated to go into your retirement account. Well, if you only make $20,000 a year, 4.2% is not a lot of money, right? So how do we handle this? Because remember, our Social Security system addresses this. It addresses the inequities between low income and high income. But in the private marketplace, not so much. So we can't redistribute income the way that Social Security does, right? So we lose this element of fairness. Remember, as we've already talked about, that Social Security redistributes income. But how do we do that in the private marketplace? I can't make Bob give money to Jill in the private marketplace, right? How does that work? So if you look at our Social Security system, you've seen that higher income earners get higher rates of return than, rather, lower income earners get higher rates of return than higher income earners. Well, how does that happen? It's not an accident because Social Security makes it happen, but we lose that. So let's look at some internal rates of returns across income. And again, you see this. Look at the top data. It's for low income. The middle data is for mid-income. And then the last stuff at the bottom is for high income. Well, let's compare 1997 year of birth. For 1997 year of birth, you see 4.62 rate of return for low income. You see 2.55 for middle income. You see 0.98 for high income. Well, how do we do that if we move to private marketplaces? Number three, some people wonder, will people save? With Social Security, it's kind of a forced thing. And there's redistribution. Will people save if we privatize? So will there be a mechanism to ensure that people save for their futures? Because in our current system, you don't have a choice. They take the money out of your check, and you're going to get something back later. So will there be a mechanism to ensure that people save? And what happens if they don't save? Of course, as I've already mentioned, we could make this mandatory through your job. So maybe we make it not optional. That seems like the best way to go, right? So just like Social Security works now, we're going to take the money out of your paycheck and it's going to go directly into a retirement account. So we can solve this problem, but some people still bring it up. Now, another question. What if you're a housewife? What if you're a housewife? Remember, housewives get Social Security benefits based on husband's income. But if you're a housewife, you have no income, so there's no paycheck to take money out of, and there's no way to set up a private retirement account for you. So how do we handle the non-working spouses? That's an interesting question. What if you become injured or disabled? Right now, we know Social Security has disability. But if we get rid of Social Security altogether, then our federal disability program goes away. unless we find some other way to fund it. Number 4, are people savvy enough to invest privately? Can people handle this? Are they savvy enough? Are they smart enough to invest privately? How do we ensure that people make good decisions? Because guys, remember, when I have a retirement account with Longwood, they don't manage my money for me. I have to make decisions of where to put my money. I have to pay attention. I have to update the composition of my portfolio. How do we help people get the education that they're going to need? I'm sure you know a lot of people for which this would be an incredibly challenging thing. There's a lot of people that have no idea about money. They know nothing about investing, and they definitely don't want to learn. How do we get people educated so that they can make good decisions? What happens if people lose their money? So I put my money into a bunch of stocks, and now they've gone belly up. I've lost a lot of my money. Now I don't have economic security anymore, which is the whole point of having Social Security in the first place. So clearly there's some risks here if people mismanage their money. All right, number 5, what do we do when the stock market has a correction or a long-term decline? Well, we've seen stock market corrections, right? And we've seen long-term declines. If all of our retirement money is tied to the market, then we also have some risk. So we have seen some long periods where inflation-adjusted returns were close to zero. Remember, I've said the stock market's not a panacea. Over the length of your life, you're going to get probably an okay return. But from year to year, that's not a guarantee. Between 1901 and 1921, we had close to zero adjusted returns. Between 1929 and 1949, we saw just about zero returns. Between 1962 and 1982, and then I found 1964 to 1984, and I don't know why those overlap, but we also saw close to zero returns. So again, that's problematic. We've also seen years that have really high returns. So again, when we talk about our private portfolios doing better than Social Security, we're talking about in the long run. We're talking about over our lifetimes. But there's no guarantee, right? As this clearly shows. This graph right here looks at the S&P 500 going from 1950 to 2012, and you see a lot of volatility. Of course, that volatility gets far worse when we get into year 2000-ish, 2001, and we see ups and downs and ups and downs. So what happens if I want to retire and it's 2003? Well, look at 2003. We have a really big drop there. So my portfolio probably went way down unless it was incredibly conservative, right? Well, now that puts me at risk again for retirement. You get the idea. There's no guarantees. There's no guarantees people are going to do a good job managing their accounts. They might be too risky. They might forget to or not choose to reallocate their investments as they get closer to retirement. As you get closer to retirement, you want to move them into low risk things, right? To make sure the money stays there. But not everyone's going to do that because not everyone knows. Here's another example. This right here shows us the stock market crash of 1987. And I remember that. I was in graduate school at the time. And I remember my professor stood up and this is all we talked about for a whole class period in my PhD level macroeconomics class. So again, we have seen some significant behavior in the stock market that shows the volatility. Do we want to tie our retirement accounts to that? Again, this is a good question. 6, survivor benefits. Remember, right now in our current system, we see benefits for survivors. Well, this would work differently if things were private accounts. So Social Security has these survivor benefits. So remember I told you the story about my friend who has 4 children. Her husband killed himself, and she got retirement benefits for her children, or I guess survivor benefits, because her husband was participating in the Social Security system. And so until they were 18, they received checks, and she was the steward of that money. So a husband dies, he leaves children behind, they get survivor benefits in our current system. But if we have private retirement, well, the only thing that goes to those same children is what's in the retirement account. Well, what if he's 30 and he'd only worked for 5 years? There's not going to be that much in the retirement account. It won't have had a lot of money added to it, and it won't have had much time to appreciate. So those children aren't going to get the same level of benefits that they would in our current Social Security system. Should we be concerned about that? Bottom line, we're going to see risk when the survivor benefits aren't the same as they are under our current system. Number 7, and this is looking at Chile as a model. Chile has been seen as a model because they've privatized Social Security, but they're not necessarily faring so well. So all eyes have been on Chile trying to decide, is this a good thing or is it not a good thing? Well, investment accounts of retirees are much smaller than originally predicted. So people thought this is going to be great. Let's privatize Social Security. And we just haven't seen the outcomes be as good as we'd hoped. That when we look at investment accounts of retirees, they're not as big as we thought. 41% of those people in Chile who are eligible to collect pensions choose to continue to work. 41%. Does that seem high? To me, it seems high. There might be people who choose to work. For example, I might not want to retire at 67. I might want to keep working. But 41% choosing to continue to work, that suggests that maybe pensions aren't adequate. If pensions were adequate, we'd probably see a lot fewer people choosing to work than 41%. Some people are pointing out the voracious commissions and the administrative costs that are reducing rates of return in Chile. So the commissions basically and the administrative costs of these private accounts are eating into the rates of return. Now, could be some ways to address that. So I'm not suggesting that's the kiss of death, but that's what's happening in Chile. The transition cost of shifting to privatized system has really been high. So here's what's reported for Chile, and this is the cost of moving to privatized retirement. 6.1% of gross domestic product in the 1980s, 4.8% of gross domestic product in the 1990s, and expecting to average for 99 through 2037, 4.3%. So the bottom line is it's not been cheap to move towards privatization in Chile. So between accounts not growing that much, rates of return not being as high as possible, and large administrative costs that eat up a large share of GDP, it hasn't been everything that we've hoped to see. So the costs that we're seeing in Chile for privatizing Social Security are far higher than had originally been projected. So lower rates of return, people not retiring, high administrative costs not going well. And partly this is because the government's obligated to provide subsidies for workers without enough money in their accounts. So understand what that says. Read it again. The government was obligated to provide subsidies for workers who didn't have enough money in their accounts to earn a minimum pension. So what we're saying is that government looked at people's accounts, and if you didn't have enough in your account based on whatever rule the government set, they gave you a subsidy. Well, could we find ourselves in the same situation where there are people who have to be subsidized because there's just not enough money that's accumulated in the account to give them a minimum pension? Yeah, we could absolutely find ourselves in that situation. If we guarantee to bump people up to at least some minimum pension, then this starts to get a little more expensive and it's not completely private anymore, right? Because the government's pumping money into the system. 8, some people point to the idea that the real winner in all this will be Wall Street. So Wall Street will win. Why does Wall Street win? Well, because huge amounts of business would flow into the private financial market, right? Think about it. If every one of us has to have a private account managed by some company that's investing in Wall Street, then Wall Street's going to make out like the big winner, of course. So that would be brokerage firms and stockbrokers. All of these entities are going to be the big winners in this game. Now, as economists, are we particularly concerned about this? I mean, if things are working and it happens to be the case that certain industries benefit, is that a reason not to do it? Well, of course not. But this is something that people point to often. Oh, we're going to create these huge economic wins for Wall Street. 9, the commission structure eats into rate of return. The commission structure of investments eats into the rate of return. Well, what are they talking about here? Financial firms charge a commission to manage your money. I know you already know this. They don't do it for free. So what we're saying is that everyone would have to have a firm managing their investment portfolio. That's how it works with my retirement account. And so some people suggest, look, there's so much commission built in that it's going to eat into your rate of return. Now, if you look at estimates, they range. So it's hard to really know what's the most accurate, but they range from 0.25% to 1.4%. All right. On the low end, it's not so much. At the higher end, yeah, it's getting significant. Do we appreciate that whatever it is, your commissions reduce your rate of return? We need a little better information here, right? The economist in me says, look, I'm not willing to buy this argument until I get better information because it works for my private investment account now. Why would it not work for these new private investment accounts? So this seems a little bit of a smokescreen to me where people try to, throw up smoke to divert people's attention from the real issues. But we could certainly get to the bottom of this if we wanted to learn more. Another problem that is real, though, is that small monthly contributions can be hard to invest. If you know anything about investments, you generally can't go invest $50 a month. It's a lot easier to invest larger amounts of money. And for small contributions, yeah, rates of return are going to be drastically impacted by commissions. So, for example, when I used to invest with somebody on Main Street here, the commission might be $125 for every stock transaction. So it only made sense if I was buying a few $1,000s worth of a stock, right? But what if I'm low income and I'm only putting in $50, $75 a month? How do I invest that? How do I not have the commission eat me alive? That's when it does become problematic. So big contributions, a little bit easier. Small contributions, yeah, we do start to see that commission become a bit problematic. Here's as some numerical example. If we spread 7.65%, which remember is the equivalent of the contribution for Social Security, if we spread that over a year and we have a person making $25,000, well, he's only allocating $159 a month. So imagine going to your stockbroker and saying, I want to invest $159 a month. Well, it's a little bit harder, but that doesn't mean it can't work. We just need to maybe change the model a little bit. Many financial entities also have minimums. So Is it hard for somebody who's only allocating $159 a month to have the same access to investments? Yeah, it could be. But again, that's not necessarily the kiss of death. It just means it's something that needs to be addressed. So in conclusion, we've already talked about that not everyone will fare the same under Social Security. We know in terms of real rates of return, low income fare better, high incomes, they fare more poorly. Women fare better. People who live a long time fare better. Families of deceased receive survivor benefits, and disabled people receive benefits, and housewives receive benefits. So there's a lot of things that Social Security is doing. As you know, the rate of return for Social Security is not really tied to market performance, right? We all understand that. It's tied to the pay-as-you-go structure, and it depends on how many workers there are for each retiree. Privatization has some desirable outcomes. We've talked about the benefits of privatization: potential higher rates of return, more control over investments. It could be more sustainable, but it also introduces some risks. It's not going to apply to stay-at-home moms. It's not going to apply to housewives. What do we do with the disabled who are getting benefits under Social Security? Not everyone's going to invest intelligently. The market fluctuates. What happens when we have big downturns or big market corrections? That's problematic. So as a country, we have to decide what the role of Social Security is in our society. What is its role? Is it to promote economic security? Is it to give us a guaranteed minimum? Is it to give us a good rate of return? What's the purpose of Social Security? What do we want it to accomplish? And do we all agree that this is a highly normative question, right? There's not an economic model that answers this. It's going to be about our value judgment. And we could debate this in class, and we might not all have the same opinion, because this is certainly not a positive question. So it's clearly normative. Implementation of a private system for retirement is not easy. We've already talked about that we need to have a dual system in place. We can't just immediately end Social Security. Remember, we have to pay taxes for that unfunded liability that goes way, way into the future. We're going to hopefully allow you guys one day to put money into your own retirement accounts. That's going to help you. I want that for my kids. Most proposals that we see have some kind of an opt-out option, and that's really what we're talking about with privatization, that you as young people would have the opportunity to opt out. That means you don't have to participate in the Social Security system, that you can put money into your private accounts, but you'd also have to pay a small tax. And why would you have to continue paying a tax? And maybe not even that small. You'd have to continue paying a tax to fund people like me, the people that are owed money under Social Security. So the idea here is that you as a young person would forego your future benefits, and maybe you even get a bond to compensate you for the past contributions you've made at a reduced rate. For example, if you're 40, this is the idea of maybe buying you out. So if you're 40, maybe I give you some kind of bond. It buys you out of the system. It compensates you for the fact that you've made contributions for, let's say, 15 years. But it's at a lower face value. The idea is that we have to lower the unfunded liability. So make sure you understand what I'm talking about. We owe money to every person who's paid into the system. If you're 35, you've already started to accrue benefits. If you're 42, you've started to accrue benefits. We have trillions and trillions of dollars that are owed to people in the future, and we have to get that down. So if we can find a way for you as a young person to opt out, forego future benefits, and walk away from any benefits you've already accrued, maybe because we give you a little bit of it now, then we can get that unfunded liability down. But remember, we still have to create the stream of taxes for paying Social Security. You still have to contribute to the taxes that support people like my parents and will ultimately support me. We can't simply just end it. So thank you for listening, guys. Let me know if you have any questions.